That Matters Live. We're coming to you live from Center for Social Innovation in New York, and I am Monica Mitchell. This is my co-host Shane Snipes, and we have like an awesome show planned for you today. It is September 15th, 2014, 6 years ago today. The financial crisis happened when Lehman Brothers went down. So, what do you
That's
think?
crazy. For me, I was a huge investor. I'm worth about $16 billion in the stock market. So, I lost $1 billion that day, but, what's $1 billion?
Hey, I literally knew people that lost $65 million in one day. I knew those people.
What the stock market has become is it's basically a numbers game and a math game and a tech game at this point. That's what happened during that time period, which I feel like is one of the reasons why we sort of lost the humanity of what was happening.
Well, we definitely lost the humanity. The really interesting part is like through the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s up through 2008, there was no humanity in making money. We lost it. Like when you talk to your grandparents or your older relatives, they all talk about how honor was in business. There was honor in business. There was people would do multi-million-dollar deals on a handshake.
Right.
And there wasn't the same kind of wealth addiction that we had.
Nice.
I
like that, wealth addiction.
Yeah, you know who said that? Sam Polk. Okay, there was this guy, and we're going to talk about him today because we have two incredibly cool Wall Streeters, former Wall Streeters, on the show today, who are now, one is a social entrepreneur, Phil McKenzie from Influencer.com, and he used to work at Goldman Sachs as a derivatives trader. And we also have John Servin, who is the head of asset management in a Vermont Fleischer Jacobs Group financial services firm, who was on the desk in Merrill Lynch.
And John's amazing.
Yeah.
But, with a name like Servant, it's so difficult to imagine him being in the financial business. It's like, I guess it's become so cutthroat with all those movies they made about the financial business, right?
Yeah.
So to have someone like John Servant, it's just such a perfect name for someone to do good. And I know you do, John. John's amazing. We've actually talked quite a bit on the phone.
Yes. Hi, John.
Good afternoon. Great to be with you today.
John is actually on the phone, not online, and we're glad to talk to you. So, John, tell me something. We're going to talk to you in a few minutes about what it was like to be on the desk at Merrill Lynch when it was collapsing and it was sold to Bank of America over the weekend. But we'll also talk about where we are now 6 years later, because things have actually, there's a silver lining. Let's just put it that way. So why don't we talk a little bit about we're at Center for Social Innovation. Before we bring Phil on, why don't we talk about what's going on here at the Center for Social Innovation in terms of financial innovation?
Yeah, definitely. And don't forget, guys, you can always reach us at That Matters Live on Twitter, and me or Monica. Monica's at Monica_Mitchell, and I'm at Shane Snipes. And today's hashtag for the show is after crash.
Oh, that's cool. I like that one. Yeah, I like it. So CSI, we have somebody else here, Sang Lee, who has a equity crowdfunding platform, which is bringing startups money from investors, right? And he was on an investment banking desk as well, right in the middle of it, a foreign bank, BNP Paribas, and they sort of sailed through the crisis for the first 2 years until the third year, and then they kind of crashed. But his epiphany started on Wall Street as well. He had just gotten out of college, 2 years out of college, and he was right in the middle of this horrific, almost like the Great Depression, and it created this urge in him to create a new economic system. And he's been one of the real pioneers on the Jobs Act and for the equity crowdfunding. I love what he's done. It's called ReturnOnChange.com, and he's been on our show before. Today, though, we want to introduce Phil McKenzie. Do you want to do the honors?
Yeah, I discovered Phil when we were doing some web searches, and he was putting a conference together. And one of his conferences that really blows my mind, and he's been working all around the globe now and sort of putting together these various events and making them powerful around something called being an influencer. So, what is it to be an influencer? What is it to create transformation, to make change? And what happens when you get a bunch of people together who feel and are thinking this way? So I think that's what Philip McKinsey really brings to the table, and he's got such a passion for it. So I'm excited to have him on the show today. Phil, come on in.
Come on in. Come on in. It's like what were those shows? Like the dating game, you know? Like, come on down, Phil. Yes. If you can actually get past that light, come in.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome
Hey, welcome.
to see you.
So good to see
Hi.
you.
How are you?
Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So great to see you. And
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
yeah. So influencercon.com. Tell us what that is.
Basically, Influencer Con or Influencer Conference in the full name is a platform which brings together tastemakers and influencers globally around shared values. What we believe very simply is what you believe deep down inside, the values, the things that make you who you are more important than what you might actually physically do for a living.
That is so cool. John, did you hear that?
I did.
Well, he's talking about shared values. Can I ask you a question? Because this goes back to your Merrill days. And by the way, Phil was an equity trader for Goldman Sachs for several years. He left in 2005. Am I right? Yeah. So tell me, what happens if your shared values are money, 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 money at any cost, like profit at any cost? Isn't that a value?
What happens if our shared values are all about money?
Yeah, if it's like cutthroat, competition, cutthroat, profits at any cost. I mean, isn't that what it was like on the trading floor? And you were a whole loan trader on the fixed income side back right in 2008 and for several years, right? So you were there when they were giving the bonuses out that were in the paper. You were there when Merrill Lynch was sold to Bank of America over the weekend, right before Lehman went bankrupt. And they had a different kind of values. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, what I think what was most crazy about it, as I look back on it, is this sort of realization that that all of the players were acting irrationally, and I don't know, I've been leading up to the culture of putting myself back in the mindset as best I could. Which, by the way, you mentioned that it was 6 years ago that Lehman collapsed. It was exactly 5 years ago yesterday that Merrill announced that they were going to be sold to Bank of America. So there's a sort of confluence of dates here today, which is really interesting. And so maybe it's because of that confluence that I get right back into that mindset pretty easily. But the thinking was, obviously all about money, as that culture is defined, and there's no secret about that. And in fact, I'd say that early on I was quite drawn to it. But as the debt financed boom happened throughout the 2000s and ultimately to the crisis, the bankers and traders started acting less and less rational, with some kind of dim awareness that it was going to blow up. And and you can see it in kind of what was happening from the M&A perspective. I mean, these subprime lenders were being bought like crazy. I remember Merrill bought First Franklin, for example, to simply to repackage that collateral and to sell it off. But there was a growing awareness that this was going to end, and it was going to end badly. And there was a sense of complicity with that it was okay, that as long as we were smart enough to be able to recognize when the trend had turned, and we would be able to offload our exposure, hey, we would be the better for it, and we would, we would come out on top.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Thinking all across the street, and of course, nobody's that smart to know, the tipping point, and with everybody playing the same hand at the same time, no amount of smarts.
Okay. Well, John, we know that part. That part we know.
So I'm interested, Philip, from your perspective, what drew you to it?
What drew me to Wall Street originally? Well, I was always into finance. I was a finance major in college, and I went to Duke University for my MBA, all with the idea of working on Wall Street. So in a strange way, I was actually very much attracted to the culture, particularly of Goldman Sachs. That was the one place that I really wanted to work. And right when I was starting there, Goldman was still a partnership, and the um, the philosophy and the idea of the firm was very different than what it is today.
Yeah, what was it for you? What was the culture?
Goldman was very well respected on Wall Street. I would argue that for young people in the mid 90s to even through the early 2000s, if you were going to work on that side of Wall Street, meaning, you know, not the hedge fund side or the institutional client side, Goldman was the place to be.
Did you hear that, John? Was Goldman the place to be, even though you were at Merrill?
The Goldman guys were a lot smarter than we were. I make no bones about that.
They totally were. But it's really interesting that Phil's talking about that, because that's when I got into Wall Street myself, right, at 99 to 2000, right, when they were transferring over from partnership into a public company. And the firm changed. And what changed with it, and John, tell me, you know, because you were there a lot longer than I was, Merrill, I mean, I think you were there at Merrill long after they were a partnership, but the mood on Wall Street really changed after the partnership when it wasn't their own money anymore, right? So did you notice that, Phil?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think the first few years at the firm, actually, it was, in many ways, even though people were making a lot of money, it was not cool to talk about the money. And in fact, when we sat there as young associates and you went through very months and months of training, which meant older former partners of the firm came back to talk to you about the philosophy of the firm and the culture and the traditions. A term that was bandied about was long-term greedy. If you did what was good for the clients, it would ultimately turn out to be good for you.
Okay, we got to stop there because that definitely was thrown out of the window by 2008. So what happened? I mean, did you hear that, John? Long-term greedy, and like, actually Goldman had principles. That's kind of shocking, isn't it?
That comment still really resonates with me. I remember Merrill as a really, really strong credit culture that, you know, we would underwrite these debt deals, and it's not too much of a stretch to say that we wouldn't underwrite and syndicate anything that we weren't willing to hold. And that was all vetted through a very strong credit process. And, I think through as technology developed and as this public ownership of securities firms evolved, the whole outlook changed and the whole set of motivations changed, and it was quick in, quick out at any cost.
So when did that happen? You were there when it happened, right? You experienced the change, Phil?
Yeah, I definitely think as the bonus culture became more public, that was something that used to be private, internal only to the firm, but you started seeing bonus day being discussed fairly popularly. The New York Post and places like that, and even nightlife and the cultural scene in New York started to more so gravitate toward Wall Street. Clubs and places like that would send, private cars down to firms to entice young traders and bankers to, spend their bonus monies in those environments. So I think everything just became hyper contextualized around the money and the consumption.
Well, that was kind of what Liar's Poker was about, right? But that was written in the early 80s at Salomon Brothers, so they were already like entertaining strippers on the trading floor. But was Merrill different and Goldman was different? I mean, I know Goldman was different because they were a client, and they were very kind of, they did deals on a handshake. People had a sense of honor. I mean, people don't know this about Wall Street, but that really was there. And John, you say that was there too in your culture. And how long were you on Wall Street?
20 years, 10 years at Merrill. If I could just say too that I agree with what Phil's saying on that point. I did mention technology, and I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And I want to blame the Fed on this one as well, because I think that when you're dealing with a culture that has propensity towards doing things in a greedy fashion, which, let's face it, Wall Street is, and I was drawn to that, by the promise of making a lot of money, frankly. I also was interested in markets, but it was a very personal motivation for me. That if you've got easy debt and hedge funds and banks can be capitalized very readily, very richly, well, they got to do something with that money, and it's going to go looking. And so, there starts the cycle of the easy money train, and the investment banks sitting at the centers of finance, emboldened and empowered by technology, they're gonna rev it up. So I think that it's part, and it's certainly, and that business of moving from partnership to publicly traded companies is also part and parcel of that whole equation as well.
Well, okay, but 10 years before that, like when did the movie Wall Street come out? Like 1989 or something like that. So we already had this icon, Gordon Gekko, and I don't know if you were in college then, John, but you probably were, Phil, right? Were you
No,
in high
John,
school?
you were in high school, right?
Phil was in high school. So did you see Wall Street? Did it influence you? Did you want to be Gordon Gekko? Because I've heard that from so many guys that they wanted to be Gordon Gekko. I even heard that from Rasanath Dasa, who you know, John, who was a guru, a yogi guru. When he saw Wall Street, he wanted to be Martin Sheen, who was like Charlie Sheen. He wanted to be, I forget the guy's character, Buddy Fox. He wanted to be Buddy Fox. How about you?
I didn't actually I was going to say I didn't really want to be Gordon Gekko. I think, but it was an exciting, intoxicating type of thing, and I would agree that if you're a young person and you can't catch or throw a ball, or you're not going to be in Hollywood, there's no place else to make as much money as Wall Street. And I think now the paradigm has shifted a little bit, where startup culture has taken on some of the tenets and values of Wall Street. Everyone's kind of looking for that IPO moment, even in the startup culture. So it's something that it might exist and start on Wall Street, but actually has transcended Wall Street to become a culture of short-term gain over long-term strategies.
And I would totally agree with that. Coming from the dot-com era, sort of riding that bubble up, because that's where I was in '99. Really seeing how the internet changed and technology evolved into this universe unto itself. Like you could literally exist within your whole sphere of startups and dot-coms in the whole world. Now it's, of course, technology in general and startups. We don't talk about dot-coms anymore because dot-com isn't new. It's like everywhere. But there is this idea that you can basically get away with a lottery ticket. Like,
yeah, that was back in the 90s. So I think what I'm hearing from all three of you is that there were two concurrent value systems. One was the Gordon Gekko, or the make it rich, with a great startup or .com in the late 90s, or take the money and run, like it was in Salomon Brothers. And then at the same time, there was this alternate universe, which was Goldman Sachs in the 90s, which was Merrill Lynch when they were based on treating their customers well and being trustworthy, right? I mean, I think Merrill was based on trust. That's what I remember hearing about them. Right, John? I'm not saying that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It was very, trust relationship oriented, very much so. And the handshake deal was very much a part of that kind of profile.
So I want to say, like, what made you leave? Let's start with Phil, because he left before you did, and then John. I know your story, but I think it's really fascinating why you left. So Phil, you left 3 years before the crash.
I never viewed myself as a Wall Street lifer. I never thought I'd be there for 15, 20 years. And in fact, the idea of making as much money as possible and leaving to pursue other things that were far more in my personal interest was always part of the plan. It just so happened that I probably parachuted out of there a little earlier than expected. I wish I had a more dramatic reason, because people always ask that, but I just really felt that my days sitting in front of these screens looking at flashing lights and numbers going up and down, it just wasn't satisfying for me personally. And I decided to leave the firm, and it was a tough decision because it was a great place to be, and I think the people there were and are well-meaning people. I think it's easy to kind of fall into the mustachioed villain perception of what these folks are like, but I find 9 times out of 10 they're kind of normal folks just going to work, doing whatever that job happens to be. I just felt that at the time I wanted to look at doing other things, and so I decided to leave the firm.
That's
Yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective on that, John. Like, what was your impetus to get out?
Uh, well, so I had always been interested in markets. I was always really captivated by the idea of working on Wall Street and being at the center of the action, and being at the right at the forefront of the breaking news story, and being on the right side or the wrong side of the trade, and feeling the gratification of having a trade go your way. Those things were really thrilling to me. I mean, on the Wall Street analogy, I really sympathize with the Bud Fox character and his dad, and all the guys who lost their jobs at Blue Star. The Gordon Gekko character, to me, I was quite captivated by, and so together, like, I really like the idea of working around a bunch of Gordon Gekkos and the villains, because I thought that would really be kind of fun to be, with these guys who are so driven for money at any cost. And so that dark side really appealed to me. But I also thought that, like, I can sort of negotiate my way through this maze of characters and have my own experience. And the late '90s and the 2000s really lent themselves to that. I mean, the tide was rising for all boats, and and I could have my experience, and I could look the other way if something didn't quite feel quite right. I could, in fact, if a client was kind of on the wrong side of a trade, I could give him a call and I could say, hey, you really should lower your bid on that because you're going to really get taken. And I could get away with that because there was enough money being made that that there was this allowance for that type of fluff, I suppose.
But John, I
yeah.
want to know, like, why did you leave? I mean, what really was the driving force for you to get out? And then I want us to transition to the good stuff that we're now seeing happen with finance and all kinds of other things around startup money and crowdfunding.
The credit crisis, Shane, led to a level of introspection that I had never had in the past. It was an awareness that, wait a second, I sat next to the mortgage desk for 6 years, and I saw them putting together their CDO trades, and I saw them talking about which banks could we foist this stuff off on, and I thought that I was, sort of, I could maintain my own sense of self in that environment because, hey, they could do their thing, I'll do my thing, but the credit crisis made me aware that in that seat, there's a collective thinking, and I am responsible for my thoughts and my ideas and my actions. And if I'm in that environment, I'm responsible for what's happening around me as well. If it's if I'm complicit in it, and so I was forced, and I look at it frankly as an opportunity through the credit crisis to say, wait a second. I've got to be mindful of how my ideas affect those around me. Everything that I do, everything that I say, even everything that I think has a slight ripple effect that affects those around me. And so the credit crisis for me was an opportunity to look at that and say, this was really an interesting time in my life. I know where this is going. There's no more room for that rising tide anymore. And for me to be successful at this job going forward, it's going to take a real level of cutthroatness that I'm just not into. It's not me.
Definitely, John. I totally agree with you, John. One of the things I want to bring out is this social enterprise and social innovation. It's sort of emerged. I read this headline today in Huffington Post, and I've read like 16 or so headlines this year about this, how people and millennials are now thinking about, I think it's 86% of them are wondering whether they want to have a full-time job and starting to understand the idea of entrepreneurship. Some 40% of them are looking to start some kind of startup. I mean, that's a huge transition from what the generation was when 2008 happened.
Yeah, I think, but see, John, you hit on something that I want to talk to Phil about because he was starting to do this 3 years before the crisis. you were talking about how you were complicitous in the process if you stayed, and you were talking about some sort of shared responsibility. So that's where we are now. There's a huge movement, not just on millennials, but we read about that in the Huffington Post. Also among, Gen Xers, Gen Y, Gen Z, which are the teenagers now, and even boomers who are like going back to their hippie days, just to talk about, okay, we're all responsible for the world we create. There's a growing consciousness about that. So what were you doing? I mean, when did you launch Influencer Con?
I launched Influencer Con in 2010, and prior to that, I'd been working with a marketing agency, and we published a magazine, and so we were always in this tastemaker influencer space from a arts and culture perspective, but I found there was a disconnect between, we were working with a lot of brands, Jaguar, Diageo, Moet Hennessy, and I felt there was a disconnect between what they wanted to do in the influencer space and what influencing was really all about as a culture. And the conference was initially put together to have those conversations, and then over the years, as I've learned more and developed more and met more people and traveled more, it's come down to this idea of shared values. And it always comes back to this as a values-based platform, because I think most of these industries, whether it's in the social entrepreneurship space or in the Wall Street space or the marketing space, if you are coming into it with the wrong value proposition, you're going to get the wrong output on the back end. And as much as you can address the values of these organizations or these systems, the more likely you are to have a outcome that's going to be better for all of us.
So what Phil does is he puts together these conferences in New York and all around the world, and brings together influencers that are really on point with what we're talking about here today, shared responsibility. So John, now you're up in Vermont, and you're the head of asset management for a small financial services firm. You left New York, you left the big city, you left Midtown, you left your apartment behind, and now you're like a country bumpkin, right? You ski and you skate, and your commute is like 3.5 minutes, and you get home, you get to play, be a soccer coach. What do you do? Like, how do you approach your finances now when you create financial services for your customers?
So I'm a proud bumpkin, and admittedly so. We manage individual wealth, and we also manage retirement plans on behalf primarily of Vermont companies. And our mantra here is that we are in the business of helping people plan for retirement and plan well for retirement. And a lot of times that's simply raising awareness in terms of, what is a 401k, and to how can you transform your 401k into a pension. Oftentimes I find the conversation going to real basic but really important philosophical stuff like, what is enough? There's across all income classes. I'm very struck by the common denominator of sentiment that we don't have enough. I don't have enough. There's never enough. And you could be talking to somebody who makes $2 million a year, and you could be talking to somebody who makes $18,000 a year. The fact is, we all have enough. And the challenge of raising the level of awareness of what is important, what matters, and what is necessary. Those fundamental questions really lead to some interesting answers and can put people on a path that's a little unconventional, I suppose, in terms of planning for retirement. But I find them really fulfilling. To just challenge some basic assumptions of, if you look at what you're spending today, is that justifying foregoing what you could get in the future at this rate of return in your retirement? So there's some really fundamental discussions about value, priorities, and life.
But,
so I
John,
really enjoy it.
John, more than that, because you and I have had a lot of conversations about this. It's really about being honorable, and you can be honorable in finance, and that's really what you've done. You've gone from being like some kind of wild trader on the trading floor in Merrill Lynch, like you used to get in fistfights on the floor, and now you really feel like,
oh my God, you were that guy
yeah, he
in
was that
the
guy.
movie. What was it? Didn't you play that extra when they had that brawl on the?
No, he really did. He got in fights,
Seriously.
and he's a big guy, so it was really.
Never happened on the floor. It was always off the floor.
Okay.
I see.
If you were going chin to chin with somebody, you had to stand your ground. And that's just like, look back at that and just chuckle at the absurdity of it.
But now you're doing business with people that you can shake their hands and you can trust again. And is that because you're not in New York? I mean, do we have to leave New York to do that? Because what is Wall Street like now? Where we are, we're in the Center for Social Innovation, and Phil's here as well. And we see this incredible movement of social entrepreneurs who have emerged, and this is what Shane was referencing from a Huffington Post article this morning, that because of the financial crisis, we are here with That Matters Live. Because of the financial crisis, Phil's program, InfluencerCon.com, is growing bigger and bigger. Because of the financial crisis, CSI has a waiting list and 300 social entrepreneurs here. And because of the financial crisis, you left Wall Street. You were a very well-paid, very successful executive, and walked away from the money to make a fraction of what you made before, to have a different life based on trust, put your head down on the pillow at night. I think there's been a lot of really positive things coming out of it, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's not just like a 401k, it's how we approach money and wealth now. So
well, I mean, me personally, I still think it's really, really important to think about what is enough. That was such an important question. How much is enough? Because we really don't consider that in our purchases or in what we've got. We think about, wow, that was beautiful. Look at that iPhone 6. Oh my God, it's coming out.
All right, I want to tell you what
the
iPhone 6. I was reading about it. Like, people were, supposedly online for it. On eBay, it's going for $4,000 because otherwise you'll have to wait till November to get it for $500. So you can get it on eBay right now for $4,000. So that just shows you that some people haven't changed that much. But what I really see now is, and I don't want to judge people, I just feel like there's an understanding, a complete consciousness shift from the financial crisis, because it caused so many people pain, and I want you both to comment on this, that exactly what you said before and what Phil was alluding to, was that we have this responsibility to co-create the world we live in. And if we want a savage, cruel world where people are thrown out of their homes, or they're hungry or lose everything they had saved up for 40 years or 20 years or 10 years, we don't want to live in that world. So where do you see the changes coming in? I mean, what do you see are the values now that are emerging from teenagers to 20-somethings to 30-somethings and up?
Yeah, I think it's I'm probably a little bit in the middle in terms of the optimism. I think the financial crisis did provide an incredible opportunity, because it shone a light on some things that might not have been apparent, because it's easy to kind of hide them when there's all this smoke and mirrors. But when it's hitting you in the face, you had to confront some realities. And I think now we've reached a point where we still have the same structural problems, but they're, again, kind of in some smoke and mirrors, and it's harder to identify them now, because I think people aren't feeling the pain quite as deeply as they were a few years ago, or we've become accustomed to the pain, and so we've kind of resettled ourselves into new norms. I think our challenge is facing these things and identifying these questions of how much is enough, for example, becomes a values-based question. The rush for iPod 6 is in that same vein. If you have a phone that's functioning and works and can do most of the same things, like, is there really a necessity to go out and overspend $4,000 for a new one? This idea of scarcity, I think we've been conditioned and trained to think of our resources, the things around us, as being scarce. So that puts us in a situation where we have a zero-sum game. We're fighting each other for resources that appear to be scarce to us. And when in reality, spaces like the Center for Social Innovation show us that actually there's many resources that are plentiful. It's just how do we access those things? So again, I think these come back to values-based conversations. The more we can frame these things, not so much about the items. So it's not so much about the iPhone 6. It's not so much about the money that you make. It's what do you think about that money? How does it impact your life? How do these tools impact your life and how you feel about yourself and your self-worth, and how we've kind of created a consumer culture, which again, you combine a consumer culture and always thinking in the short term, and you have these structural issues that I'm talking about. I think if we shift to long-term thinking, long-term strategy, much in the line of retirement, and you shift your values, how you think about people and your place in the world, then you have an opportunity to actually get something positive out of all of this sort of conflict that happened in the financial crisis.
Well,
That is a really good point.
Yeah.
That is, and I'd love to get your perspective on this too, John.
You know, I just think about the days that drew me to Wall Street and how I was just was willing to put up with a lot and to just I was very taken by the aura of money and wealth and the bank. You know, fast forward now again to this opportunity. I think that amid all of the bad news, for example, of the environment and the world becoming a smaller place, I am an optimist because there is this growing awareness that we don't have a choice. We are now I think as a culture, much more mindful of how our actions affect those around us. And there is a growing body of very smart people who are making life decisions to do something about it. I say this sometimes that you don't necessarily, if you're in finance and and you're coming out of the credit crisis, you don't necessarily have an obligation to go and to do something that is more mindful in terms of helping others. But you should recognize that you have that choice. That we're no longer. I am no longer blinded to this kind of this aura of what was behind the curtain when there was nothing behind the curtain. And so that to me is the empowerment that we have a choice. That more and more people are moving towards in the direction of recognizing that choice. And I think that there's a growing body of making choices that are to the betterment of the whole.
Yeah, and
awesome.
I just want to reference the article that we were talking about earlier with the power of millennials, and this is a really good article on a couple of levels because it captures what we're talking about, but it captures it almost in the mentality of the millennials having grown up in a time when the crisis happened, and then deciding like, okay, my future can't be the stable thing that I thought it was going to be, so now what do I do? And there are all these inspirational components in this story. They're on Huffington Post, guys. Be sure you check it out.
Who's the writer? Britt.
Yeah,
Oh, so Britt?
Yeah, absolutely. Britt Hyson is the writer, and she really captured it well.
Oh, she or he? Oh, it's a she. Yeah, it's a great article. But also, I just want to mention that, John, you are one of the few people on Wall Street that actually walked away from that money, and I really think it was very courageous. And John is now on our board for the NYC Social Innovation Festival. That we are going to bring all of these social entrepreneurs, that including Phil, and many, many more here at Center for Social Innovation, and my pal Shane Snipes, together in late February, early March, and we're going to bring everybody together in New York to show what's really happening, what the change is like. Because what I really think is happening now is, rather than being attracted to Gordon Gekko, we are now more attracted to, like, Bono, or the mentality of creating something in the world that we can leave behind that creates value and that saves the world. So, Bill, tell us a little bit about, just before we go, what's your event next week you have?
Oh yeah, we're doing an event on September 23rd at Impact Hub, New York City, and it's called Design Thinking, Social Change, and Empathy. We'll be discussing how empathy needs to be a more concrete part of design thinking if one is going to drive social change. So again, it's one of those conversations where one of our key value constructs, which is this idea of empathy and compassion, is going to be used in driving social change going forward.
Where does empathy and compassion come in? I mean, I know where it comes in social entrepreneurship, but where does it come in the rest of the world? That's the big question. How can we integrate empathy and compassion into what we do every day, no matter what we do every day? Even if we're selling cars, you know, like in a used car lot, if we're on Wall Street and we're trading, if we can incorporate empathy and compassion into everything we do every day, from manufacturing to service jobs to everything, it would be a completely different world, and that is really what we're talking about here today.
It is, for sure, and I just want to echo that, and I want to echo the fact that we've got so many people in New York City who really have stepped up. Like that waiting list here at CSI for people to become part of it. It's not like this is an anemic organization trying to get by. They have tons of people who are very excited about it. Everyone who comes by to tour the space just gets super innovative. Like they walk out of here with this like innovative mindset. They're like, this space, you can feel how welcoming, how creative it is. So I love it.
And it's in New York, and it's happening all over the country, all over the world. So, and you were traveling all over the world, meeting everybody. So, thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you guys for having me. It was great hearing from John as well. So we haven't met yet, but it's good to hear your voice.
You're going to meet each other in late February, and we'll keep you posted. Everybody who's watching the NYC Social Innovation Festival, John, you rock. That's all I have to tell you. Like, you are my hero.
Absolutely.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. It was a pleasure and an honor, Monica and Shane and Phil. It was a real pleasure to talk to you as well.
Very good. Thanks, everyone. Everyone
Thank
have a
you.
great afternoon. Be sure you check out That Matters Live and all of our future broadcasts. Talk to you real soon, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great day.